Good afternoon. The May 20th meeting of the Oklahoma City Water Utilities Trust will be in order, and the first item of business is the approval of the minutes from the previous meeting.
Move approval.
Second. A motion and a second to approve the minutes. All in favor? Voting, please. Minutes are approved. The next item is the consent docket.
Move approval subject to individual consideration.
Second. Motion and a second to approve the consent docket. Are there matters to be discussed separately? Hearing none, voting please. Consent docket's approved. Next item is the concurrence docket, and there's one item on the concurrence docket.
Move approval. Second.
Motion and a second to approve the item on the concurrence docket. Are there comments or questions concerning this? Hearing none, voting please. Concurrence docket's approved. Next item. Items for individual consideration. The first is a professional services contract request for consultant services concerning the municipalization of Tinker Air Force Base's utility operation.
Mr. Chairman, we have the consultant present. Bob Woodhouse, as I understand it, is going to make a brief presentation, if that's acceptable to you, to describe the work that will be done.
Certainly. If you'd give your name and address for the record, please.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Bob Woodhouse. I live in San Francisco at 195 Alhambra. And I'm joined here today by our partners from Guernsey and Associates here in Oklahoma City, Sue Haas and Jared. They'll be our partners on this project. Okay. How do you make it go forward? There we go. Sorry, I got it. So how this all came about, this wasn't the idea of the trust. This was the idea of the government. They sent a letter back in May of 2013 to the trust requesting you provide a sole source proposal for the water and wastewater systems at Tinker Air Force Base. Tinker Air Force Base currently has a water distribution system and a wastewater collection system. And basically the government wants to get out of the business of being a utility service provider, and so they're offering those up basically for sale and operation by the local utility. They've already gone through a competitive process and that failed, so now they're asking for a sole source proposal. So our firm, along with Guernsey, has significant experience in doing these type of proposals, and so it's a significant effort. We provide a technical proposal, price proposal, and contract documentation for each the water system and the wastewater system. And then we would enter into negotiations with the DLA, Defense Logistics Agency in Washington, D.C., later next year. And if we reach agreement on what the true cost is to operate and maintain those systems, you'll be able to secure those assets and proceed with operating them. Now, this process I've highlighted on this chart, there's really three main phases. The one I've just talked about is the procurement phase. If we're successful in phase one and securing a contract, then we move into what's called the transition phase. During the transition phase, we transfer ownership of the assets from government people who are now operating them to Tinker staff, and that takes about 3 months. But then there's also these studies we like to do in order to perform the true due diligence needed to better understand the condition of the assets and, quite frankly, to manage your risk going forward. What we would do then is do a complete condition assessment of that system and come up with a plan at the end of it to renew and replace the infrastructure as it reaches the end of its useful life. At the end of transition then, becomes the third and final phase, which is what we call the performance period, and that's for a period of 50 years. But the opportunity we have there that's unique for the sole source offering is that you have an opportunity to redetermine your price every year. It's called price redetermination. So in terms of managing your risk going forward, we're going to be able to put enough protective language in the documents at each phase, plus assist you during price redetermination during the performance period in order to manage your risk and serve the people of the military, which is a backbone of the community.
You mentioned earlier that there had been an attempt to privatize, but that had
Yes.
not
Others,
proceeded.
there's a competitive process
Right.
before, and others came in and proposed, like American Water, American States Water,
Right.
all these privatizers, basically. And that's why we call this a municipalization, because this is really a municipal approach to the
And
privatization.
where did those proposals fall short from the Defense Department standpoint?
They
Do you
don't
know?
tell us that.
They just said nobody wins?
They just said that was unsuccessful, and now they're required by law to go to the local provider and offer you sole source opportunity.
So we don't necessarily know the range of their offerings, for example?
We do not.
Okay.
We do not. This slide summarizes then. Our approach will shield Aqua from foreseen and unforeseen federal contracting requirements and pitfalls. We've been doing this for 15 or 20 years from both sides of the table. We provide the protective language that I spoke about in the proposals to the government to protect Aqua in the subsequent phases. We will fully engage Aqua staff in the process and will facilitate buy-in to the proposal. And I'll be back here before the trust a couple times at least over the next year giving you updates on where we are in the process. So we have a very actively engaged project team that we're going to work with staff here. We believe that our approach will proactively manage your risk in each step of the process. We will communicate with Aqua management to help them understand and promote the proposals. We will provide the pricing of the true cost of providing the utility service and the cost of functioning as a government contractor. And there's two things there you might notice. There's providing the utility service, which is something that Aqua does very well. That's being a utility service provider. That's what they do every day. But the added element is being a government contractor. And there's some nuances there from our experience that is going to help you, I guess, be the interpreter between the utility service you're trying to provide or are providing and the government paperwork, documentation, seeing change conditions and so forth. And finally, this is the kicker. At the end, we've seen prior cases where if you have a competitive enough proposal compared with what's called the government should cost, we've seen instances where you can actually request the cost of putting together your proposal. And so we propose to do that to the maximum extent we can. So the amount that you see here before you today may be able to be recovered as part of the proposal process. Thank you.
Any questions?
Nothing further.
I just really like this opportunity. We sometimes get drug into things that aren't our core service. This is kind of our core service, and I think this is something that we can do well. And I think this is a good opportunity to probably save a little money for the federal government, for us to come through and do all right on it.
Any other comments? Questions? When would we expect for you to be back with another report or an update? Or
I think we had a trust meeting scheduled early fall, didn't we?
We would take from this contract approval date, we would put together a preliminary plan and give you a schedule on updates.
Mr. Chairman, I would move approval.
I have a motion and a second to approve the request for qualifications. Any other comments, questions? I do have one other question. Would we be entering into a separate pricing agreement with them as compared to what our prices are for everybody else? Would it be?
That's correct. They would be a new large customer for you. And eventually, we would like to work towards them having similar.
We don't negotiate our prices with new large customers. They buy water from us at whatever our rates are. Mm-hmm. At least I don't know of a situation where anybody's come to us and negotiated rates.
part of this service, you may recall that when we approved the contract with Red Oak to do the cost service study for the workshop later today,
Right.
it had add alternate pricing should we want to use them to look at these pricings that are devised as a part of the development of the long-term maintenance and operations plans and capital plans, so that we make sure that our costs are fair and appropriate. And the annual process where we get to re-up that is aimed at making sure we recover our costs.
Okay. I say okay, I'm not sure I understand that, but I don't, I guess I'm having some difficulty in understanding why we'd have a separate type agreement with a customer.
They're a separate class. It's so much different than any other customer we have and the services we're provided. They're just a different class.
They're a different class today. They also, the United States will contract with us only if we're planning out the improvements that are necessary for that location. It's not, we don't know yet whether those are improvements that we could afford, and we don't believe that they are based on a preliminary review with the rates that we currently offer Tinker Air Force Base. We believe there'll have to be changes. So it is complicated, and you raise a point that we'll need to explain as we go forward as well. Happy to do that.
Okay, thank you. We need to vote on this on the resolution. Resolution is approved. Next item is the executive session. Do we need executive session?
I don't think so. The councils, we did have a mediation session a couple of weeks ago. We did brief the council on it last week or so. We're happy to answer any questions. There's not substantial news.
Okay. Then we need to strike that item.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second to strike the executive session. Voting, please. Executive session is stricken. Next item is items from trustees. Any trustees want to speak? Staff, citizens to be heard. Citizens? We have reports from the staff. Are there any comments on the staff reports?
Very briefly, it was a wet spring last year. It's a dry spring this year so far. Still the forecast is for normal rainfall in May and June. And you're seeing that in the treated water pumpage changes that we're seeing now. While this year, before winter, we were running about 4 billion gallons of water production behind the previous year. We're now making a move to catch up a little bit. We're within about 3 billion gallons and moving right along, because just simply the difference in the weather pattern when it was wet and when it was dry.
Okay. Any other comments? Hearing none, we're adjourned. Thank you.